meeting over to our leaders for tonight, Harold L. from Missouri and Jimmy A. from New Jersey. And we're going to continue the 5 delusions of alcoholism with delusion number 4.
Well, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Thumbs up.
Yep.
All right, fantastic. Well, my name's Harold. I'm an alcoholic. It's really great to be here with you tonight. I'm coming to you from Big Mo, St. Louis, Missouri. My sobriety date's April 7th, 1987. My home group is AA on the Rocks, and it meets tonight. It's actually going on right now in St. Louis City. It will start here in about 20 minutes. Strong Three Legacy group in St. Louis. Proud to be a member of that group, but I'm also glad to be here with you tonight. I come from a great line of sponsorships. Sponsorships made a huge difference in my life. So I just want to make sure we cover that being a part of what I would consider a Three Legacy home group, active in that home group, have a flag planted there, and I'm active in that, and sponsored, but also really committed to carrying the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Those are first most primary and necessary for the life that I have today. So I want to make sure that we cover that. But I just want to say welcome to everybody. If you're brand new to Alcoholics Anonymous, welcome. Welcome to Springhouse and all the people at Springhouse. We're glad you're with us. Hey, look at them all applaud. That's awesome. And welcome to those who haven't been here yet, and you just kind of pop in on this workshop. And here we are 3 weeks into it. We're doing a workshop called the 5 Big Delusions of Alcoholism. And where does that come from and why are we doing it? So I'll cover that really quick just for those who aren't with us so they can kind of catch up. But this workshop was born out of the Department of Corrections. It was born out of a CPC PI corrections collaboration with the Department of Corrections, with Missouri Eastern Probation and Parole Board for the eastern side of the state. A lady who is now a trustee for Alcoholics Anonymous, Nancy, at that time was the director of probation and parole for the east side of Missouri, and also a warden of a 500-bed facility here in St. Louis. And Nancy, her brother was an Alcoholics Anonymous when he was still with us. He's passed along, but I sponsored her brother, heavily involved in corrections, and she asked if we could put together a team and come and educate probation and parole officers at a deeper level on alcoholism. What does it mean to be alcoholic? What is the big challenge and the big hurdles of alcoholism? And so this is how this whole workshop got born out of that work. And so after a lot of work and we narrowed it down to 5, although we're not just saying there's 5 delusions, but we just narrowed it down to 5 for the sake of a workshop. And so those 5 delusions, I'll give them to you real quick. Delusion number 1 is I'm not alcoholic, right? And that delusion unfortunately kills most people that have alcoholism, or really cripples their life. Let's just put it that way. Delusion number 2 is that we get past delusion number 1, we can concede to innermost selves that we are powerless over alcohol. But we come to the rooms and we'll say, hey, my name's so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic, but it's not my fault. It's this delusion of victimization and all that goes with that. And so we covered that last week in detail, and the problems that come with that. And then delusion number 3 is I can get to a place where I can own my stuff. I can finally come to the rooms and say, my name's Harold, I'm alcoholic. I take full responsibility for my actions that brought me here. But let's just be real with each other. I've broke too many hearts. I've burnt too many bridges. There's little hope that my life will ever mount to anything really. And these mountains that I've created are too big to overcome. The impossible will never become possible in my life. So why even try? And this delusion of impossibility, this delusion that time has passed me by. And the older you are when you get here, the harder this delusion is, the more magnified this delusion is. You're 50 years old or 70 years old or even 80 years old. It's like this delusion can really cripple you because you think it's just impossible for me to reconcile my life after so many years have passed. And so that's delusion 3, and we covered 2 and 3 as fast as we could last week. Delusion number 4, which we're going to talk about tonight in detail, is delusion of spiritual disqualification. And we'll unpack that more in a minute. And then next week, we'll finish with delusion number 5, which there's no real purpose for my life. And so tonight we're going to be talking about the delusion of spiritual disqualification. And so how I want to go about it tonight is really just talking about my own experience, strength, and hope as it relates to this subject to bring us into this delusion. We all come from different walks of life. We all come from different upbringings, all those things. But the ultimate delusion, the delusion that we're afflicted with long before we ever pick up a drink, which I talked about in session 1, is this delusion of inequality, the delusion that I'm not enough, this delusion that the world and society and the culture and the context that we live in puts us in. It puts us in this box and tries to define who we are and what we should be in life. It starts when you're young. What are you going to be when you grow up? And then you start to get defined by these things. And you're defined by where you live and how many zeros are on your paycheck, by the color of your skin, your gender, your sexuality. You're defined by what you drive, what you wear, what you listen to, what you watch, what you read. All these things try to define you. And if you get caught in that web, which we all do, it's a lost cause. It's like chasing your tail. And because we suffer from extreme self-centeredness, we're so engaged for our own self-interest that we can never live into that fully. And it creates all this stuff that we talk about and unpack in the big book, this restlessness, this irritable, this discontent feeling, this feeling that, this dual feeling that's going all the time. I want everybody to pay attention to me, but I want everybody to leave me to hell alone. And the kicker is I want you to do it at the same time, just impossible ask for in our lives. And so we struggle with all this at varying degrees, all this delusion of inequality. And we can continue to struggle with that in our sobriety and throughout our life because the world doesn't stop. The world, every advertisement, every billboard, everything's out there saying you're not enough. You need to be more of something else. And it's easy to get caught up in that. And Lord knows I've chased I've chased that car too many times in my life. And it's exhausting and it's crippling and it can be deadly, to say the least. And but anyway, so that delusion really feeds all these. And so but when it comes to this delusion of spiritual disqualification, I'll unpack what that means in a second. But I just want to know that we all get here at different spectrums. Some of us come with strong religious convictions. Some come with none at all. Some come with a fundamental idea of God. Others not so much. It wasn't clear. Some watched, some would argue that they had religion shoved down their throat, or it was one thing on Sunday, but the way it was lived out at home was totally different. It was a lot of hypocrisy in what they witnessed as far as people claiming to follow a God, whatever that God looked like. We come from a background of atheism or Gnosticism. All these things, all of us have varying degrees of this stuff when we get here. I'm going to just share my own experience with all this stuff, and then Jimmy's going to do the same thing. But I would just encourage you to lean into it. And as the spiritual appendix says in the back of the book, we can only be defeated by a rotten attitude and belligerent denial when it comes to spiritual matters. And so the only thing it asks us is how to be honest, be open-minded, and to be willing when it comes to spiritual matters. So I really encourage you to lean into that set-aside prayer that Catherine led us through in the beginning. Really important, I think, tonight as we go through this and we talk about all this stuff. But I just want to talk about the delusion and how it impacted my life and what's taken place over the past 34 plus years to help me unpack it, deconstruct it, reconstruct it into something that's been vibrant in my life and ultimately transform my life. And that's what I want to share about tonight. I was raised by a single mom. I was raised by a mom who was married to 2 alcoholics. And it led her, the first marriage and all the dysfunction and all the alcoholism, and led her to a state mental facility and where she lived for a number of years before she was well enough to get out. And she got out and she gravitated right towards another alcoholic, happened to be my father. I came out of that marriage, but somewhere between age 2 and 3, my mother just said enough. She didn't have recovery. She had no introduction to Al-Anon or anything, but she just said, I had enough. And she ran my father off and she turned her will and life over to the care of God as she understood God. And just said, it's me and you, kid, no education, no background, divorced twice in the 60s, pretty bad stigma to have on your head, no education, no family whatsoever. Her parents died really young. And it was just her and I. And my mom turned her will and life over to God as she understood God, which was through her Catholic traditions, her roots, her faith. And she never wavered on that until the day she died in 2015 and grew into an amazing, amazing woman. And in my experience, and I probably say this because I'm a mama's boy, but I say it with all sincerity, that there's just nothing more beautiful than a woman who's walked with God for a long time. It's just nothing more beautiful. And that's just been my experience. But my mother was one of those people. She was the greatest winner and rock in my life. Had not been for her faith demonstration, her life dedicated to love and service, I would not be here today. I can promise you that. So my hats are off, and my arms always go out to the single parents in the room, not just moms, but dads too, but just single people doing the best you can to bring people through life. It's not easy. But what she wanted me to do, we had no resources. We had no economic background. We lived in beat up old houses. We shared a bathroom with the lady next door until I was 7. She didn't bring resources, but what she brought was this attitude and this faith and this demonstration and this over exuberating compassion and love for me. And what she wanted more than anything from me was the one, to know that I was loved, but number 2, to know this power greater than myself. And that was, for her, was her Catholic faith. And so I started out in a Catholic school, and from kindergarten to 4th grade, I went to a Catholic school, a little bitty country town, less than 100 people in school. And as far as I can remember, I don't have the best memory of those days, but what I do know is I didn't have any real objections to it. You had to go to mass every day. I loved it. I mean, to be transparent, I loved that stuff. I loved it so much I'd come home and play church. Maybe some of you did that. I came home and set up TV trays for an altar and threw a cool blanket over it so it looked cool. And I filled the fruit bowl full of potato chips for the Eucharist. And I got some great Kool-Aid for the wine. And I got an old towel out of the closet for a stole. And I got a Bible out I can promise you we never read. You know, and once in a while I'd even bring a few knuckleheads over, save a few souls at the Longhouse. It was a great day. You know, Father Harold, be thy name. You know, and that was a big part of how my life started out. The rock operas were out. Some of you 60s freaks and 70s freaks remember the rock operas, Tommy and Godspell and Hair, and of course, Jesus Christ Superstar. And I could sing all those soundtracks forwards and backwards still today. And they influenced me big time spiritually and still do today. You put any of them on, I could sing right along with it, knowing backwards and forwards. So all that stuff influenced me at a young age. And so my spiritual framework foundation was that when I started out in life. Came with that, though, was all the theology at that time. And I'm in a private little school, private little town. And then my world got rocked, as I shared before. And somewhere between 8 and 9, my mom said, look, we're moving to St. Louis. I said, why are we doing that? She says, because you got a brother and 2 sisters you don't know about. And so this whole mysterious part of my mom's life opened. Never knew about this part of her life. I didn't know she came out of a state hospital and she had this previous life. And so we up and moved to St. Louis, and we moved into a trailer park, and we lived in a beat up old trailer park, and lived in the back where they called everybody trailer trash. And I was no longer in a private school. And I went from a school of less than 100 to a school of thousands of people. And this is where my world changed, spiritually, especially because I had this small framework of what this higher power looked like, what God looked like. And now I walk into my first class of evolution. And it destroyed in one class, my faith was watered up and tossed in the trash. It literally destroyed my faith because everything I thought I knew about life, about creation, about being a human being, and about you was destroyed literally within one class session. Here I am believing that the world's only maybe 10,000 years old and all this stuff that comes from scripture. And now I'm learning the world's 4.5 billion years old. That's a big difference between 10,000 and 4.5 billion. And so it just rocked my world. And then came with that is the theology that came behind that. And I'm not talking about the Vatican II days. I'm talking about the Vatican I days, where there was a lot of emphasis, on hell and damnation and separation from God and punishment. And by this time, this spirit, this sin-driven life that I lived, this life full of all kinds of character defects of every kind, were already starting to rear their ugly head, and sexuality and masturbation and now drugs and tobacco and lies and booze and crimes and theft and go on down the line. All this stuff was adding up in my life, and all that led, you hear things like, boy, you're going to hell, or you think it's hot now, kid, wait till you die. These are things that I would hear a lot of when I was young. And so it's like, I was spiritually disqualified before I was even in double-digit age. I was already spiritually disqualified. There's no way I can live up to anything anybody's talking about. And so all this led to spiritual disqualification. And so at the age of 10, I grew up, with this single mom who was gone all the time, working all kinds of jobs, just trying to keep a roof over my head. And I grew up on the streets. I came and gone as I pleased. And as soon as I could do that, this whole relationship with this power was gone. It was over with. And that was it. And in my life, I turned my will and life over to the dark side, to King Alcohol. And that's where I remained until I came to you people. But that's the setup. That's what I came here. Now, I don't know what you came here with, but that's what I came here. I came here with a lot of twisted perceptions. I came here with a whole lot of doubts, and I came here with a whole lot of questions. But I didn't know how to articulate any of it. And so I had this jump when I got here. I also came here with this channel that we talked about that was completely clogged shut. And we talked about it last week in detail. This channel was clogged shut. So there was nothing getting through this channel. It was full of resentments, full of lies, full of secrets, full of delusions. It was just crammed full. So I come to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I see God in everything. I see God on the walls and the steps. I see it in our literature. Everybody's talking about it. Higher power, God, spirituality. And I just recoiled from it, almost like a hot flame, because I was disqualified in my mind. You know, it's like, what are you talking about? The grace of God and forgiveness, and how is that even possible? But again, I couldn't articulate that, but this is what was racing through my mind. And I had God in a box when I got here. And I'd be willing to bet that you have God in a box when you got here. And you may probably already have God in a box while you sit here right now. And I'll unpack that more in a minute when I'm talking about directly with that. But I think it's important to understand it. And Bill Wilson had God in the box. Dr. Bob had God in the box. And I'll throw a little bit of that story in here as well. And I'm not going to read or cite or anything for the sake of time, but I just want to let you kind of know where I'm headed with. I also was under this ZAP theology that goes on, especially in the Bible Belt where I'm at right now, that you come in, you get saved, man. Just come in and get saved. And I don't know how many times I've been baptized, sprinkled, dunked, you name it. I've hit it somehow, some way, you know, and been zapped, you know. And the only thing was nothing changed, you know. And if I was there next week, I'd be walking up there again to get saved again, because I've been acting like a heathen all week long, you know, and week after week, and felt nothing. There was nothing ever happened. They tell me I was zapped. They tell me I was saved. I didn't feel saved. I felt as lost as you could ever be. And so I had that part of that in my life too. And most of that came through the corrections, Department of Corrections, and my encounters with God. And I always seen, you know, through my dark, lost ways, I always bounced into people that claimed to be godly people, and always looked like I needed help. I can remember being at an Ozzy Osbourne concert. I'll never forget this. Coming out in Atlanta, Georgia, come out and just crashed to the gills after an Ozzy concert, Motley Crue and Ozzy Osbourne. And I come out after that, and there's all these God people out there, and they're handing me verses and scriptures and stuff. And I wake up the next morning, I got like a God box full of all this stuff that was given to me after an Ozzy concert. I guess I look like somebody who needed God in their life at that stage of my life, but I was far from it. But I'm just saying, I had all these encounters when I got here and all this stuff. And so I stayed here, and I came into AA, and I told you I was on step 9 for the first 3 years I was here. I was committed to the fellowship, trying to fit in. I didn't really belong to anything yet, because I hadn't lived into the steps or any spiritual way of life. I didn't believe the steps would change my life. I didn't believe God would change my life. And I was completely closed off from this higher power at this stage in my life. I fell in love with you people. I came to believe in you people. I still believe in you people. I believe in our steps, our traditions, our concepts. But when it came to this whole higher power concept, that I struggled with all that. And for the longest time. And I'd hear people in meetings say, you know, well, God really spoke to me. Or I felt the miraculous power, miraculous transformation of God. I felt God's spirit. I felt God talking to me. And this wasn't a coincidence. You know, this is all about God. And I'd hear all this stuff, and it sounded like this to me. You know, I couldn't relate to it. And I'd pray, God, keep me sober today. And God thanked me at night. That was about the bulk of my prayer. I might say the Serenity Prayer with you in the meeting. I might say the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meetings. But that was the basis of my prayer life. It was that shallow, because I didn't believe it. You know, I just didn't believe that this power was even possible, or a relationship with this power. And so the spiritual disqualification had me really, I struggled with it big time. And I wanted to have it. I you know, of course, I lusted for God's blessing. I wanted God's grace in my life, but I still wanted to be in charge of my life. I still wanted to live my own life and do my own thing. And what's step 3? I mean, step 3 says now right at the end of how it works, it says now we're at step 3. And what do we mean by that? And what do we do? And it says the first requirement is that we have to be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. We have to be convinced. Another way to say it is, I had to come to the end of myself. We all have to come to the end of ourselves. And that comes at varying degrees. Sometimes it's when I finally put down the bottle, and for many of you, that's the case. For many of us, it's not. The bottle was just one beginning. And then you come in here and you find out that drinking wasn't really even your problem. It was more of a solution than it was a problem. And then you start getting introduced to the root of the problem. And what's that about? And then what's the book say? Well, we had to quit playing God. Why? Because it doesn't work. Well, I could never once in my life said, I'm God. I walked around with a cape on or a big G on my chest. But when it was unpacked for me and I began to understand that I was the captain of my own ship, I was the master of my own enterprise, my own terrain, that I could resonate with that, no doubt about it. And my actions proved that. And the inventories proved that. But what about this God? What about this higher power? And how do I get free from this delusion that I'm disqualified? How do I get free and open up to this? Well, I think before I unpack mine, let me unpack Bill's. And if you go back to Bill's story, and you can remember when Ebby Thatcher comes in 12 Steps Bill, and he comes in, and I'm going to just paraphrase for the sake of time, but he comes in and Bill goes, all right, what's going on with you? And he says, well, I got religion. And Bill says, well, okay, well, let's let him go on his religious rant. And as soon as he's done, we'll have a drink. That's what Bill's saying. Just let him have his rant. So shut up and I'll let you rant. And Ebby goes on his little pitch about where he's at. And then he realizes he doesn't want to drink. And he knew that there was some transformation in this guy's eyes. He could see in his eyes. He knew this guy his whole life. He drank with this guy. So what's up with that? And then they start talking about this higher power. And then you hear what basically Bill pulls out his box that he's got God in, and he sets it down. And I call this the box of certainty. And this box of certainty is what a lot of us struggle with. And is that we're so certain that God is this way. We're so certain that this is who God is and where God comes from and how God operates in the world. And we're certain of it. And we're so certain of it that the pain of thinking differently or outside of that is so painful that we can't stand it. So we'll just go surround ourselves with people that think like us, walk like us, talk like us, act like us. And our world gets really small. And you see this happen in religious circles big time. And you know what I'm talking about. So now you're caught in this box. This is the box of certainty. I'm so certain this is what God is and how they operate. And so I had this box. And so Bill Wilson had this box. And he unpacks it. He talks about being in the Winchester Cathedral and with his grandpa. And he talks about Jesus. And he talks about not too closely followed by those who follow him. This is all Bill's framework and his understanding of who this higher power is and the pain of that. And he's bringing it out as he's telling Bill this story. And after he gets done unpacking this box of certainty, he unpacks it all right there for Ebby. Ebby finally says to him, hey, Bill, why don't you just choose your own conception of God? And it transformed Bill's life. And it led to where we're at tonight, sitting on this meeting. If you get the book, The Best of Bill, and you read the very first paragraph on the subject of faith, Bill will say this, and I'm paraphrasing again for the sake of time, but Bill will say this: God as we understand him, her, it, whatever, God as we understand God is the most important language in the vocabulary of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's Bill Wilson's own word. It's the most important vocabulary here. And what does it do? Well, it creates liberation. It creates a space where we can take God out of this box of certainty. We didn't ask for this box of certainty. It was handed to us by our upbringing, by culture, by society, but we're having. You have some version of it. I have some version of it here. And when the insane thing I think about it is, in my own growth and spiritually, is that it's the only thing we put in that box. For example, if I was to get on an airplane and fly to New Jersey to be with you in person, am I certain that when I get on that plane is not going to go down and crash somewhere along the way? Am I certain of that? No. But do I have enough confidence in the pilot and the FCC and the FAA and everybody else who's involved in air flight travel? Do I have enough confidence in that I can safely get on this and the odds are I'll get there safe and sound? Yes. So I don't go on there with certainty. I go on there with confidence. Same way when I drive a car from point A to point B. Am I sure I'm not going to slide out the road or get hit by a drunk driver? No, I'm not certain of that. But I have enough confidence in my own ability to drive and follow the rules and be attentive to what's going on that I can confidently go from point A to point B without any problems. Same way when I get married and I say I do. To death do we part, for better or for worse, for sickness or health. Am I so certain that this bride of mine is going to stay with me for the rest of my life? I'm not certain of it. I have confidence. I hope that's the case, but I'm not certain of that. But when it comes to this God, for so many of us, we're so certain that God is this way. And so we're closed off. We're not open-minded. We're not honest about higher power. We get here and it's Jesus, it's Allah, it's whatever. It's Hinduism, it's pantheism, it's whatever our worldview is, whatever our theology is. But it's whatever it is this is how you connect with God. Anything outside of that, I'm closed-minded to. And any thought about being outside this box creates a lot of pain, just like all the pain evolution created for me. Evolution blew up my box, and so this wrestling to the point. And so my choice is dismiss it all together, which is what I did, or my world's going to get really small, and I'm going to do is surround myself with people who think I do about this higher power and dismiss everybody else. You're wrong. There's 5,000 religions in the world. Mine's the only one that's right. My idea of God, how you get to know God, is the only one that's right, and the rest of you are wrong. And that stuff can happen inside Alcoholics Anonymous too. I've seen it millions of times play out. And so this is what blocks us off, and this is what blocked me off anyway, is what I should say. So this zap theology, this idea, this box of certainty. And so being able to take God out of that box and become honest about my doubts, and we all have doubts, friends. Be honest about my questions. Why am I here? What happened? If God is a God of love, then why is there COVID-19? If God is a God of love, then why did I lose so many people I care about in the last 2 years? If God is a God of love and joy and all this stuff, then why is there evil? Why is there murder? Why is there rape? Why are there children abused? Go on down the line. And those are all fair questions. I had all those questions. If God is a God of love, why can't everybody just be sober? Why do people have to die from alcoholism? Why does people have to OD and die, blow their life up and take other people along with them? See, these are all questions I had when I got here. I didn't know how to ask those questions, but the reality is I had these questions and I had a lot of doubts, and I can still have doubts today. But the beautiful part about Alcoholics Anonymous and where the freedom and liberation come from steps 2 and 3 is it allows me to take that out. And we have a whole chapter on we agnostics that helps us unpack this. And of course, we could spend weeks on that chapter alone, but that's what it ultimately says. That you're suffering from a spiritual illness, a soul sickness is ultimately what we suffer from. What is the soul? Great question. What is the soul? Well, my interpretation, understanding of the soul, it's made up of 3 things: our mind, our will, and our emotions. And they're all pretty broken when we get here, and they're pretty fractured. And we're just, we're finite, broken people when we come here, big time. And spiritually bankrupt on every level and spiritually disqualified. And then a lot of those other delusions that come ahead of it that we've already talked about. And so this is where I was at. What liberated me? What set me free? Well, number 1 was steps 2 and 3. There's this freedom to, hey, we know you got this box of certainty, Harold, but just do me a favor. For right now, let's set that aside. Can you just be open-minded enough that we can set that aside and say that you just might not be right? You might be some truth in there, but it might not be the full truth. Are you willing to subscribe to that? Yeah, okay, man, and was able to set that aside and become honest, open-minded, and willing to go on with the rest of the steps. So, you could easily argue that, step 3 is really the decision to work the rest of the steps. That I'm actually going to pick up a pencil and paper and do an inventory for the first time. And I can promise you, my buddy Matt says it all the time, and I think he's right on. Don't get hung up on the God stuff. Just focus on working through 4 through 9, working through the 12 steps, and God will meet you on the other side. Now, I love that. Ain't that awesome? That's really what happened in my life. It's truly what happened. And so leaning into that. So I started that inventory finally after 3 years of being here. And it was when I shared step 5. It's when I told somebody my entire life story. And I got this channel cleared. I got the resentments. I got the secrets around the sex and the crimes I committed that I never been caught for. I got all this junk out for the first time in my life ever. And this power that we talk about, this light, this illumination, whatever you want to call about, the spirit, finally was able to get through this channel. And I had this experience, this transforming experience. And not only did it transform my life, but it gave me a sense of belonging I never had up until then. I really felt like I belonged here. that my life mattered, my sobriety mattered, you mattered, and there was some element of purpose for my life. There was some element of value, that I truly was forgiven, that there was this power. It was a lot of grace, amazing grace and mercy put on my life. And it's not by mistake that all this happened, that here I am, and what am I going to do about it? And so that liberation that came from steps 4 and 5 changed my life spiritually. And it allowed me to start having this connection and resonating with you spiritually, where I was blocked off and disqualified before. And it was important, but this idolatry of certainty. And see, this is, when I say a box of certainty, this is what we worship sometimes. Not really worshiping God, we're worshiping what we know about God. And this is where all the pain comes. This is what I know about God. I'm willing to argue with you, debate with it. And what does 12 by 12 say? 12 by 12 says we got to withdraw from the debating society. When it comes to this, we got to put this stuff aside. And so being able to do that, despite our doubts, despite our questions, despite our twisted perceptions, we had to get to that place. And then not be afraid to ask the questions. I have doubts about this. I have, God is a God of love. Then why do we have systemic racism? Why do we have, oppression and marginalization when it comes to sexuality or gender or economic status or rate? Why? And see, these are fair questions to ask. And I had these questions. I was not brave enough to ask them in the beginning, but as step 2 opened up my life, I was able to ask these questions and not worry about the repercussions of it, and trying to understand, how does this all work? Why is there evil and all this stuff at the same time? But what I really come to believe, more importantly than anything, and what I come to understand is free will. Say so, that I have free will, I have say so in my life, and so do you. And you can call free will the greatest curse or the greatest gift, however you want to frame it, but we got it. I can choose to get off here tonight, and if I want to go drink and burn my life in the ground, I can go do that. I have the right to do that. And there's many of alcoholics tonight that will do just that. So I have this free will, I have this say so. And it's based on where I'm at spiritually. What is the formation of my spiritual life and development that will determine what I do with that free will. If I'm living for my own self-interest, then I'll do whatever it needs to achieve self-gratification. Whether that's with booze, alcohol, sex, money, power, glory, prestige, pick it, it doesn't matter. I'll go to any lengths for self-gratification if I'm living for my own self-interest. If I'm living for God's interest or this higher power's interest, then something's got to change, because I can't do that on my own power. It's just impossible to do that on my own power. Something has to change in me. Something has to be transformed. And so that's what happens. So I have free will today. Free will is I choose to be here with you tonight. The free will is I choose to pray. I choose to do the things necessary to continue this life that's been the most amazing life I've ever lived in my life for the past 34 years, and to be liberated spiritually. So steps 1 through 3 give me the opportunity to do that. It's an opportunity to surrender, to concede to my innermost self that I'm powerless. It's also an opportunity to become honest, open-minded, and willing about my doubts, about my fears, about my questions, but also to toss this box of certainty aside and be open to other ideas about God, other faith traditions, other experiences. And friends, I can promise you, I've been to a lot of theological and religious things in my life. And the only thing I can tell you, if you want to use the language of kingdom of God, the most kingdom looking thing I've ever experienced, witnessed, or watched in my life is right here, right now. And it's Alcoholics Anonymous. It really, truly is. And we don't care about where you came from, where you're going, we just don't care. Don't care about what you believe, don't believe, your doubts, your questions. We don't care. Just come here. And we love you unconditionally, which is about as godly as it gets. And the idea of one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic is probably about as spiritual you're ever really going to get. It's the closest that you're ever going to get face to face with this power. And it's here, and it's at our availability. But those things that I've looked up that really blocked me off from that experience, and they were all delusions. And the delusions are powerful, and they have me in a tight spot. So the opportunities come through steps 1 and 3, but the liberation came through 4 through 9. Of owning my own life, looking at my life honestly, being transparent about it, and when I was able to be transparent tell someone else my entire life story. It changed my life. It just cleared that channel, not completely, but it cleared it enough that I started to have this spiritual experience. And as page 75 of our book says, it's at this stage of our sobriety that most people will say they had their first real spiritual experience. And that was mine, and I no longer felt spiritually disqualified. And that is an amazing feeling when you feel like, hey, this power that I'm talking about truly does want a relationship with me. And the beautiful part about that is it takes two to say yes to a relationship. And the beautiful part about that is this higher power has already said yes. So the $1 million question that all of us have the answer is, will we say yes to this invitation? And when I said yes to the invitation, especially after my channel was cleared, it changed my life. And so 10 and 11 and 12 help keep the channel open, because life's going to happen. The big pillars of life, and resentments will happen. Fears will happen. Nothing will block your channel quicker than fear. Friends, I mean, fear will block that channel that fast. Pride and fear are the bogeymans. We suffer from big time. And what I realized, and I guess was almost apocalyptic for me, is that I always spent my theological idea of God was out there somewhere, and that we're all trying to get there. And if we're zapped, it really doesn't matter how we live here, because we're going there when we die. But what I've come to understand is that God, we don't have to go up the mountain, because God came down the mountain to meet us where we're at. And that's what happened to Bill Wilson. That's what happened to Dr. Bob. That's what happened to me. And it came through people like you. It's where that witness came from. And it's changed my life, friends. It totally changed my life. And I don't know where you're at on your spiritual journey, but I'm just telling you, that's that spiritual disqualification. This channel that we're talking about is it. And here's the deal with the channel. If something happens to the bridge, there's, between me and God, then nothing's getting across that bridge. Are you hearing me? If there's something that gets in the channel, it's going to block me off from this power. Still today, 34 years later, I got a secret. I compromise my life. However I want to do it, it's going to get in the channel. It's going to block me off from you and this power. And it's 10, 11, 12 are here designed to help me keep this channel open. That's the beautiful part about our fellowship. The whole fellowship is designed to keep this channel open. And here's the beautiful part. We don't create the channel. The channel is not even something that we create. The channel is the Spirit of God. And what does our book say? Where we find this channel? Deep down inside. It's been there all along. This channel has always been. But we just delusional, didn't see it, didn't know it existed, or are told we didn't qualify for it, or we were disqualified from it, which is where I think most of us get to. And all this channel gets cleared, and it leads us to our ultimate purpose. And we'll talk a whole lot about that next week. But that's, my experience with this delusion, in a very short version of what it means to be spiritually disqualified, how I started and how I got there, and what I did to get liberated, and what I do to stay liberated, to stay free and connected with this power. So it allows me to engage prayer, meditation, devotions, connections, things that we're doing, studies, whatever, in a powerful, powerful way that keeps this channel flowing, but also it's still the key elements of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And I can come and sit in a room with people from all faith traditions, all walks of life, atheists, agnostic, firm believers, whatever, fundamentalists, and I can sit there gracefully and listen to every one of them. And it'll either enhance what I'm already believe and grow it more, or challenge it, whatever. But I can sit in the room today, and I don't have to be shut off or feel like, this box of certainty doesn't rock my world anymore. And I'm so grateful for that. And I owe that to you people. You liberated me. And what a liberation it is. So I'm grateful to be here tonight. I know that was a lot. I know that was a fire hose of information, but that's about as slow as I can talk it tonight. And with that, Jimmy, I'm going to pass the torch over to you. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy. I am an alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober. And I have a home group. It's called the Design for Living Group down in Neptune, New Jersey. I have a sponsor, a service sponsor, sponsor a lot of guys, most importantly, sober since March 28th, 1987. And great to be back with you guys tonight. Great to see a lot of my friends on here, and my buddy Harold. And, now I understand finally, after doing this a few times with Harold, why he wanted me to do this. Since this started in corrections, I guess he needed another criminal to help him with this. But here I am, and And what I love about this, when we did this the first time, Harold, like I think I explained this, Harold sends me the manuscript. He goes, here, read this. In 4 days, we're going to be on virtual Scotland, and you got to do this with me. And Harold never told me what to do. He just said, read this and let spirit move you any way you're going to be moved. So that's how we've been doing this. Our stories are different, but they're exactly the same. And I never played church when I grew up. I hung out with kids that the only game we played was how to rob the coin box in church. That was the game we played. But I'm glad to be here, and again, welcome everyone, especially the sober houses. Hopefully, we don't go too far over your head. This could be very deep sometimes, our conversations, and we're glad you're here. So. My talk, I don't know, the way I'm being moved right now is just to talk about this delusion more in sobriety, more with long-term sobriety, really. Not so much growing up, though I'll probably, who knows where I'm going to go with this, but I just had some opening ideas or opening thoughts that happened today. So I was putting something in my calendar in my phone, and then I realized I was in 2021 and not in 2022. And when I looked at the date, I noticed that me and Harold were doing this exact same thing that last year at this time, and what I realized was the day after I buried my mother, this was the delusion that we were talking about. And what hit me so much was how fast time has gone in 1 year. How fast this life is moving. I don't know if it's for anyone else, but it seems like it's really moving real quick. And, I had a long talk with my sponsor today, and, there's a good friend of ours that many of us know, and he had a really serious operation today. And we have Mike, who comes on here and records. Mike's, having a rough time in his personal health. And it just, what happened was I just started to think about how I take things for granted, friendships for granted. And, it's always, I should have called them. Why do I wait to do the things I do? And, I just, and what I really was thinking about, knowing that I was going to speak here tonight, was rather than doing things that we're supposed to be doing, how much time do I spend in these delusions versus what I should really be doing? That's my point. And how much of my sobriety have I remained agnostic, really? Here, God, here's the drink problem. I'm going to handle the rest of my life. And how much of my sobriety have I really been separated from God and really been separated from my loved ones? And, and getting caught up with a lot of things that are not really important, especially when you hear about friends going through a rough time, right? And I think these delusions are the things that I really got to examine, maybe on more of a deeper level. Everyone on this call today has been given a gift. It's called sobriety, and the question is, what am I doing with the sobriety? Am I still falling into these delusions? Am I still falling into the victim role? Or am I still falling in, I'm not good enough? Or am I sitting here tonight thinking I'm not even alcoholic? And this delusion tonight, we're, spiritually disqualified. There's a part of me still to this day, 34 years sober, 63 years old, that sometimes I revert back to that, that 6-year-old, that 8-year-old, that 10-year-old kid when, prior to even picking up my first drink, with all the insecurity I had at that young age, with all the anger that I was internalizing, with all the fear that I was living with all that stuff that I had nowhere to go until I found alcohol, there was a real connection I felt of the religion of my upbringing, and that was, I was raised a Catholic, and for us old guys, or maybe some of you older people, well, maybe I shouldn't speak for anyone. The way I saw it was that this God was going to punish me for all the sins I've done. Harold kind of alluded to that and made mention of that. And now I've been in AA for a long time. I've made all my amends. Many of the people that I've made amends to have forgiven me. And with the help of the 12 steps going on, and the help of a sponsor, going on retreats, talking to priests, talking to deacons, talking to brothers, confessing my sins of the past. There are still those times when I fall back into that old idea, driven by that old idea of why would God help a guy like me? Even though the evidence is contrary to every thought like that. Why would God help a guy like me? This self-defeating attitude that, I don't know, I have, maybe you have. Why do I fall back into that? Why do I fall back that I can't forgive myself for some of the things I've done, even though you've forgiven me? Why do I fall back into the delusion of the victim and discouragement? I do a nighttime inventory with all the guys I sponsor. I do it with Harold, and we go through all the questions that, the evening review asks us. We do a little different where, as a group, we read a book, and we need to pick one up. We haven't done it in a little bit, but we read a book basically, and we read it 2 pages at a time. And at the end of the inventory, we ask ourselves, after we read these 2 pages, how has the reading tonight affected my heart, my mind, and my soul? And we've read some great books, some conference approved books, history books, spiritual books. And the one book that always jumps out at me is a book that we read called The 4 Agreements. And maybe some of you guys have read that book, by Don Miguel Ruiz. And in that book, he talks about belief systems, and he talks about the belief systems that are being put into us by other people, our parents, our teachers, maybe a priest, nuns, grandparents. And what he calls it, it's the book of laws. He calls these belief systems the book of laws. And anytime I go against the book of laws or these belief systems or an old idea, that it creates in me this sense of shame, this sense of guilt, this sense of remorse. And when I start to live in the shame of things that I haven't done or things I've done, or I start to become the jury, the judge, the jury, and the executor of my own life, and this victimization, like how Harold talked about a little earlier, this sick, twisted mind, and the rabbit hole that it could bring me down, and that old idea that I'm going to hell for some of the things I've done. And I can't believe that still comes around once in a while, this sober, this long, and so this deep-rooted 1960 Catholic religion that I was raised on, that I'm sure was manufactured by a really sick mind when I thought that was the way it was. What it really shows me today is how I've spent most of my life with a wedge between God and a wedge between you. And it could be a protective wedge. It could be an accusatory wedge. It could be an anger wedge. There's always been something between me and you. Now, I said a statement when we did this the first time, and Harold called me out on it, said, I think that's a delusion too. But the old timers used to say that, alcoholism is a soul sickness caused by a separation from God and a disconnect from each other. Now, I've kind of looked at that, as Harold has said, it's a delusion. And yeah, God has never left me, but how many times have I left you? How many times have I allowed a wedge between me and you over pettiness sometimes, or jealousy, or envy, or whatever the case may be, and the resistance I have to change, or the resistance to bring God into that relationship, or as Harold's manuscript talks, of being willing to live on terms other than my own, that 3rd step decision, right? And I really identify when Harold talked about Bill and sitting with Evie, and Evie goes, I have religion, he's bringing the Oxford Group principles to him. And I could feel that resistance, because that's what I felt when I first came in. So with the same sort of agnosticism that I've had in my sobriety and early sobriety and can today, and that delusion of separation from God and from you, this idea of God, I picked up a drink when I was 13 years old. I landed in Alcoholics Anonymous at 29 years old. And for 16 years of my life, I lived like a pirate. I was a criminal, I was a thief, I hurt people, I did a lot of bad things. So of course, when you tell me that God's going to be the solution to my problem, my mind says, there's no way. God's been watching me. I'm going straight to hell for the things I've done. I couldn't see the truth about that stuff. walking in here with the mentality of a 13-year-old. But as I started to go through the book and I started to understand what I was really up against, and when I started to understand the solution to my problem, and we come out of that chapter more about alcoholism, and I think Harold made a little reference to this, but this is more in we agnostics, but it's, the closer I get to God, the nearer he gets to me, or vice versa, however that statement goes. And what I started to understand is, as I was starting to shed some of these old ideas about a lot of things, and I was getting closer to God, I started to wake up to reality of my life. Nowhere in Alcoholics Anonymous does it say it's about getting us to quit drinking. That might sound like a controversial statement. What it's really telling me, what the book has been telling me, is that you can't stop drinking. Lack of power is your dilemma. You have no mental defense against the first drink. And see, what AA is really designed to do for us, I believe, is to wake us up to the great reality called whatever you want to call them, God, Yahweh, higher power, the beach, whatever it is. That's the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's your choice. But if Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't wake us up to that reality, guess what? We're all dead men walking. So the chapter We Agnostic is a chapter that, for me, I started to look at some of how I was being driven by a lot of these old ideas that created a lot of these delusions. Now, I've heard it so many times that most alcoholics have a shame-based identity. A lot of us have a lot of shame with some of the things we've done. A lot of us have a lot of guilt, a lot of remorse for some of the things we've done. And see, another delusion, and we said this earlier on, I mean, we're talking about 5, but there's a boatload of delusions that a lot of us walk around with. And one of the delusions I had coming into Alcoholics Anonymous was that if I just put the plug in a drug and go to meetings, all this stuff is going to magically disappear. What I didn't realize was when I put the plug in the jug, that this stuff would come out even more than I thought. And that I really had to start examining some of the behaviors and some of the things that created the wedges between me and you. I had to get the stuff out of the way so I could have a relationship with God. See, it's really hard to have a relationship with you when I don't, or with God when I don't have a relationship with you. If God's will for me is to help others, I got to get right with others. I got to get the wedges out of the place. Now, some of the shame that I walked around with in sobriety, with long-term sobriety, was something that a lot of you guys have heard me share about. It was my infidelity, right? I mean, I was always had infidelity in relationships, but, being 10 years sober and walking out of a marriage into the arms of a woman in Alcoholics Anonymous, because she understands. The truth of the matter was, at that time, I was so disconnected from power. I was so disconnected from AA, even though I was showing up to AA. There were so many things going on in my life that I wasn't willing to look at. And so, like most cowards, I took the easiest, softer way. And that's to jump into a relationship. But why I bring that up is I can't explain to you the amount of shame I had with that. See, through the years, I have built a moral base. Through the years, I have built these values and vows and stuff I thought were very important. And to do what I did really created a real spiritual and emotional problem with myself. And my thought was, why would God help a guy like me? Why would God even, why? Some of the other things I did growing up, a criminal, being a thief, being dishonest, stealing. I tell that story when I was 5 years sober. When I was 1 year sober, I got indicted on 2 counts of grand theft. I stole $28,000. Took me 5 years to even talk about that with a sponsor. I thought I could tuck that away and let's not talk about that stuff until I got indicted. And then when I wrote inventory, I had to write on that stuff. And to be honest with you, I was terrified. And when I had to go to court, I thought I was going to jail. And then there's a whole story behind that. But getting back to that other situation that I caused when I was 10 years sober, my anger and my rage and my insecurity came flying out. I wasn't relying on God. It was self-will run riot. And what happened was, a few restraining orders came down on me. And I remember being in a courtroom, 10 years sober. And I'm standing in front of a judge, and he's got a meeting book of New Jersey. And he's circling meetings that I'm getting banned from because of my behavior. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, first of all, who gets banned from AA? Well, I do. That's where being disconnected from God took me. That's where this delusion of, man, I am not worthy of anything in my life. I have blown up my life so bad. I am the guy that the book talks about. I build a beautiful spiritual structure up for me and my family, and I tear it down with a senseless series of sprees. And I'm here to tell you, you don't need to be drinking to blow up your life in Alcoholics Anonymous. So all these things that have created shame in my life, sex conduct, a failure in school, getting thrown out of school, jobs that I lost, relationships because of the way I behaved, it's a boatload. And I think a lot of us have that boatload. But as Harold said earlier, how do I get past this? And I think we talked about this last week. The only way I'm ever going to get past this is I have to walk into it. And what do I mean by that? That this darkness that we all have, no one's immune to that, that we have to walk into the darkness of our lives and uncover, discover, and discard these things. To really make that decision that it talks about in the third step, that, God's going to be, the director for the rest of my life. And then I'm going to be, really an agent for God. And what God wants me to really do is just help his kids. But see, when I'm selfish and self-centered, it's really hard to help others because I'm wrapped up in me. But you guys have heard me say this statement a million times because I read this every time. And, this visualization of what this looks like. Because the goal of Alcoholics Anonymous is twofold. Number one, don't pick up the first drink, the obvious one. But the second one is to really live in the sunlight of the Spirit. But in order to get out into the sunlight of the Spirit, I got to walk through this darkness of my life and start looking at the things that are creating the shame, the guilt, the remorse, the resentments, the fear, blah, 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 blah. But in daily reflections, it talks about it's a side of myself that I refuse to look at that rules me. I must be willing to look at the dark side in order to heal my mind and my heart, because that's the road to freedom. I must walk into darkness to find the light and walk into fear to find peace. I read that all the time, but I got to tell you, I never read the paragraph that says it above it. And the paragraph above it says this: since it's true that God comes to me through people, I could see that keeping people at distance, I also keep God at a distance. Kind of like I keep God in a box. God is nearer to me than I think I can, and I can experience him by loving people and allowing people to love me. And here's the line that really jumped out at me tonight. But I can neither love nor be loved if I allow my secrets to get in the way. So really, it's about uncovering, discovering, discarding the secrets in me from you, and to allow God to work through my life, and being vulnerable and calling my sponsor for 34 years sober and telling them how I really feel, and not just giving them 30% of what's really going on. The result was nil until we let go, absolutely. Why can't I let go? Why do I resist change? Why do I think that God has disqualified me? Well, Harold said it comes down to one word called pride. And pride is the essence of my self-centeredness. And pride is the thing that justifies all my character defects. And again, I thought I neatly evaded all that stuff. I looked at all that stuff. But by going through that darkness of my life, I was confronted with truth. Time and time again, self-reliance is running the show. And when self-reliance runs the show, guess what? These delusions are alive in my life. As we've been saying the last couple of weeks, alcoholism is not in a bottle, it's in my mind. And my mind will always create these delusions to block me from God and block me from you. Old timers used to say this: If you live a lie, the truth will cut your head off. And I've had to examine my life and see all the lies that I tell myself. And I think this is one of the biggest lies, that I'm spiritually disqualified. Because the evidence is all around me of what God has done for me. God has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, as we say all the time. But the real question, I think, here is, am I willing to live on terms other than my own? Am I willing to make that decision in the second step? Wait, we make a decision in the second step? Yeah, we do. And what that decision is, do I believe, or am I even willing to believe, that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity? You know, either God is or he isn't. What's your choice to be? And the ego likes to step in right now and say, yeah, God's everything. Well, if God is everything, how come I still live with delusions? If God is everything, why do I still have fear? If God is everything, why am I prey to misery and depression? If God is everything, why do I have trouble in personal relationships? And the deeper I examine that, the deeper I see that I'm playing God. And when I play God, these delusions are alive and well. My sponsor likes to say all the time that we're all human beings on a spiritual path. And sometimes we're going to fall off the spiritual path. Sometimes we're going to lose focus of all spiritual things because of our humanness. And you guys have heard me say it many times, when you fall off the bike, you got to get back on the bike. But being driven into that third step decision, based on the fact that I know some things about me, that I'm the director of life, and that I have to get out of the director's chair. And I got to stop putting conditions on relationships, that I need to become more accepting of others no matter what. Because that's the great news. Nobody has to change in my life in order for me to get well. All I need to do is get rid of the secrets and rely upon God for the rest for my sobriety. And when I do that, you know, this spiritual path becomes very clear. You know, and as I write inventory and I start getting down to the causes and conditions of the things that are blocking me from God, and the common manifestations of living a life on self-will, like the anger I have, the resentments I have, the fears I have, you know, this fear of not being good enough, all those insecurities that we all walk around with. And then more importantly, the harms I've caused. The amends process has been probably the most powerful medicine I've ever taken in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, to go to a person and to talk about the way I showed up in your life, you know, and to give you the opportunity to let me know how that affected you. I can't think of anything more freeing that we get to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. But we'll sit here and we'll sit on a boatload of amends because we're too afraid. And as my old sponsor likes to say, does you know, not finishing your amends have anything to do with you drinking again? So this process of walking through this hallway of life into the sunlight of the spirit, it's glorious. It's painful, hurts like hell at times, but boy, there's a payoff. And Harold talked about it. It's that living in that 10 and 11 and 12, you know, having that connection with God, having a life of prayer and meditation, and then more importantly, being of service to others. And then the hardest part of all about this is trying to practice these principles in all our affairs. You know, elimination of our drinking is just the beginning. A more important demonstration of our principles lies in our home, occupation, and affairs. What does that look like? God gives me great power. We're not powerless. We're powerless over drinking, drug, and control, a lot of other things. But God gives me great power through this process to carry his will into all my affairs. You know, and by doing so, you know, we have the evidence to help that new person, to help you guys in that sober house, that there's a way out. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous, but you have to be willing to put it all down and just surrender to this process and be, as they say, be patient with the process. This is not an overnight matter. So I know we're at the end. It's always great to be with you guys. It's always great to be with Harold. And I hope I made some sense, but you know, I love doing this with you. And you know, thanks for having us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy and Harold. So we have literally a minute. You can unmute yourselves and the chat is open, and say thanks to Harold and Jimmy.